Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track here at ConTinual. Today we're talking about hunters, helpers, and demon blood. In other words, substance abuse in the supernatural universe. And so I'd love to start out by having our panelists introduce themselves. Travis, how about kicking us off?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Travis Adams. I'm a social worker. I specialize in working with veterans with readjustment issues. I was also a 10-year Marine Corps veteran.
Lynn?
Hi, I'm Dr. Lynn Zubernis. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and a professor at Winchester University. And one of the things that I study is fandom and how fandom is good and healthy for people. So I've written a lot of books on Supernatural, including the most recent two with the actors and the fans of Supernatural, talking about how the show really had an impact on their lives.
And Justine.
Hi, I'm Justine Masten. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. So this topic is very close to my heart. And I am the co-author of the book Starship Therapies, Using Therapeutic Fan Fiction to Rewrite Your Life, now available for pre-sale, and it'll be out in just 3 weeks, May the 4th.
Awesome. And I'm Gail Z and Morgan Bryce. I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, steampunk, and as Morgan, male paranormal romance. I also have a chapter in Lynn's There'll Be Peace When You Are Done. And I run the Supernatural TFWNC fan group. So in other words, I've gone way down the supernatural rabbit hole, which is why I'm here today as the host. So folks, let's talk about Hunter's Helper, you know, that bottle of whiskey that's always right at hand, as well as some of its stand-ins like demon blood, and how they function in the supernatural world. I think it was Billy that made the comment that Mary, Dean, and Sam didn't have a functional liver among the three of them. Kind of a long-standing issue. But let's start with the Hunter's Helper piece of it and the warriors relying on alcohol. Anybody who wants to jump in on that from any angle, please go ahead and jump in. Travis, you want to lead us off?
Sure. Yeah. Thinking about kind of how their coping mechanism is, right? It allows them not to have to worry about the trauma that they just endured. It's something that's accessible anywhere you are, especially in America. You can go to any gas station and pick up beer, or liquor store in most states. So it's acceptable, especially if you're on the road the whole time growing up in that lifestyle. It was definitely there for them. You see Dean oftentimes using it to be able to sleep, or when he's transformed into whatever version of Dean there is at that episode, he wakes up with booze passed out around him. We see Cass when he's a human using alcohol and substances. So it's definitely throughout the whole series.
Lynn?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when I was sort of thinking about this discussion that we were going to have today. It's not really my area. I mean, I've worked with substance abuse because you can't be the co-director of a college counseling center without working with a lot of students who are dealing with substance use issues. But it isn't kind of my thing. And I was thinking about the show and just how ubiquitous alcohol is in the show. I mean, as someone who doesn't really drink very much, if I consumed alcohol the way the Winchesters just routinely consumed alcohol, and every other hunter that we see pretty much, I would, not be a productive member of society. I would not be able to keep going. It's interesting too that it is such a part of their life that they are capable of drinking, and they're not drinking a wine cooler. This is like heavy duty.
Bartles and James in the bunker.
Right. This is like
maybe the Brazilian Winchesters.
maybe. Yeah, maybe they do wine cooler. But it's serious drinking, and they're able to do that and then get up in the morning and have their faculties about them and still continue to hunt, which really says something about their tolerance at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Justine?
Yeah. Oh, I have so many thoughts. So we've all been together and talked about transgenerational trauma before, and this was passed down. The boys come by this honestly, right? Papa John used alcohol too, as did Bobby, and pretty much every other hunter. And I think to Travis's point, like it's ubiquitous, it's easy to find. There's not a supernatural therapist who they can go talk to, although that's a great book. I'm writing it in my head right now. Where the hunters have these therapists they can go see all over the country. And so this becomes a way to feel connected to something. I often talk to clients about what is your relationship like with alcohol, because it is a relationship. And for lots of folks, it's the longest lasting relationship they've had. And booze is always there. They don't have to worry about, booze going up to heaven and not calling for a while, or, not being honest about their feelings. Like, alcohol's there, and it's like a constant companion, a buddy they can always rely on. And I don't know that it would ever even occur to them that, that buddy is possibly harming them.
You know what, Justine, when you just said that, it just reminded me of something too, because, we're joking about the Winchesters don't have therapists to go to. But, one of the ways that you do give up your dependence on some kind of a substance or some kind of an addiction is by getting help and talking about your issues and feeling validated, and essentially changing the context of your life so you don't need that substance. But when you're a hunter, like, they literally could not go to a therapist, because the couple of times they have, the therapist has listened to them detailing their actual factual lives and said, well, you need inpatient. And understandably, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's no one except the small group of each other which is why they value each other, so much, why the bond between Sam and Dean is so strong, because no one else understands their lives and they can't go get that outside help. So they're really limited in their options of how they're going to cope with all of this trauma and loss that they're constantly dealing with.
Well, and I wanted to kind of come at that whole therapy piece from a little different angle, in that you've got a group of people here as hunters who are existing outside the law. They sew up their own injuries. They fish out their own bullets. They don't get medical treatment because they get locked up. So what is in their reach to cope with what they can't cope with? Alcohol, because they can't go get a prescription for an antidepressant. They can't get a prescription for any kind of medicine that would be a medical better solution. So they're kind of doing what they can with what they've got. And that seems very real life to me, because, health systems being what they are, and expense and all of that, I think a lot of people go outside the system for self-medication, especially people who have experienced trauma. And the thing that comes to mind from so many movies is a bunch of veterans with untreated PTSD sitting at a VFW bar somewhere, because at least those guys understand them and they've all got the same crazy, and bonding over alcohol. Any thoughts or comments on that angle of this?
Yeah, I have a lot of veterans that actually join VFWs, not necessarily for the bar, but they do enjoy the cost of drinks, because it is significantly less than going downtown, at least here in San Diego. And then they feel normalized. They're with their brothers that have been through something similar. None of us ever go through the same thing, but they feel very connected without having to express things. You see that with the hunters when they're doing like the pyres, like for the memorial services, they're all drinking and socializing and telling stories. and not necessarily all the gory details, because we don't need to have those details. And it's the same thing with veterans. I have a lot of veterans that'll often be like, hey, I'm having a rough day, and your buddy will see, like, let's go get a drink. Go play pool and go get a drink. And that's great. It works until it doesn't, and eventually ends up causing problems long term. While both Lynn and Justine were talking in the last question, it made me think about the earlier episodes where alcohol actually bookend the episodes often, because first thing they do, they go to a new city, go to a bar, research, and then they'd have their moment at the end on top of Baby or somewhere, and they'd open a cooler and throw each other a beer. And that was consistent through a lot of the earlier episodes, especially. But yeah, when it comes to veterans doing that, we do the same thing. We called them road sodas in the Marine Corps. Like, hey, we got some road sodas because that's what we're going to drink in the car while we're driving. Not the driver, obviously, but just to it was a way to bond also.
And on good days, it's beer. On bad days, they're working their way through a fifth of Jack pretty fast.
Mm-hmm. Or like Crowley calls Bobby out for the rot gut, bottom shelf stuff.
Well, and I mean, we haven't dipped a toe in here yet, but I mean, Crowley doesn't have a lot of room to talk with alcohol, or later on when he discovers his love of blood. And we get that amazing Velvet Underground song that that was so beautiful and poignant, and also like broke my heart.
Underground fan, yes.
Yeah.
Great music cue.
Right, but there's kind of nobody around to say. There's no outside person coming in saying, guys, I think we're drinking too much, and I think it's harming us. There are always those little asides, right? But there's nobody actually sitting the boys down and saying, hey, I'm actually worried about you, because they're all kind of addicted to hunting. There's this thing in drug and alcohol counseling called process addictions. And that's the stuff we're addicted to, like the behaviors we're addicted to. Gambling, and, some people say video games. Not going to get down on that road today, but it seems like they get a little high off hunting too.
Yeah, you raise a good point about Crowley too. That addiction was an interesting one because, and I think it might even be your chapter in Supernatural Psychology on addiction that talks about how oftentimes people are not confronting other people who are addicted because there's some gain for them from the addiction. So I thought Crowley's addiction to human blood was interesting because it was making him more human, which the humans around him were really happy to have that happen. I mean, even us as viewers, I love that whole arc because we got to see Crowley's humanity, Fergus's humanity. I didn't want him to get better either. I was totally complicit in wanting him to stick with his addiction. But that does have real life corollaries. There are secondary gains for the person and for the person around that person sometimes.
Now, what role does hunters live very dangerous lives, and they go out, they risk themselves, they come back, they celebrate not being dead on a regular basis, and they don't expect to die of old age in their bed. Sam really gets a gift in that, a bittersweet gift, because more hunters go out like Dean on the job, and that's what he always expected. So what does that expectation, having unstable and dangerous conditions on a regular basis, and then already having a mentality that says, I'm going to live fast, love hard, die young, and leave a good-looking corpse, play into caring about overusing alcohol or something else? After all, you're just going to die young. Might as well live it up while you're here. How does that play into people who are consistently in dangerous environments that they can't or won't change?
Yeah, it raises kind of like their adrenaline levels, and it's what makes them feel alive. So a lot of the veterans I work with, you know, just like Justine said, with some of the like gambling, sex addiction, high risk entertainment like bungee jumping, skydiving, driving fast, motorcycles, all these become addicting behaviors just to feel something. You know, they have to be so keen on their senses. They have to be lifted so high that regular life doesn't quite meet it. So they can numb out with substance use, or kind of try to bring it up with like gambling, say at pool halls to pay for everything. You know, while it was a means to an end, Dean genuinely loves gambling and playing pool. And Sam's good at it. It's how they win their luck back, and things like that. So to me, having those raised levels, um, and wanting to meet them or not feel so down and just kind of numbing out with alcohol often was beneficial.
I think they also, that kind of a life really leads to a very short-term focus. You're not, if you don't think you need to think about the next 20, 30, 40 years, then what you're thinking about is, I feel really crappy right now. I'm thinking about all these terrible things that have happened. I just don't want to feel that right now. And don't tell me about tomorrow because I might not have a tomorrow. So a lot of the things that we as therapists use to help people kind of think of the long-term consequences of things that are eventually going to kick them in the butt. There's no eventually. If you're convinced that tomorrow might be the day that you get impaled on a piece of rebar in a barn, then you're not going to look down the road and look long term. So that really lends itself to the things that we get addicted to because you don't have to think of those long-term consequences.
Yeah, I've experienced this with my clients too, and I tend to call it you've got a case of the effets, right? Where they're just like, I don't care. I don't it doesn't matter. Or I've already done all of this. Why not just keep going? Right? I already drank the whole bottle. Why not have another one? I've already, driven my brother away. Why not drive everyone away? F it. It's almost like this sunken cost fallacy, but backwards.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
I've already destroyed my liver. Why should I care? And I think there is a little bit of that for the boys. Well, for Dean particularly, because Sam actually does give a crap about his well-being. He eats some
At
green
times.
things and goes for jogs. Yeah, sometimes. It's
in between losing Dean.
yeah, fair. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, coming back to the point that someone made about like the roadhouse and the hunters in bars and how that's kind of their natural habitat. What about the role that alcohol plays in a culture that admittedly has some toxic masculinity going, where it's okay to drink, it's okay to say things under the influence of alcohol, but it's not okay, stone sober, to talk about feelings or difficult things. How does alcohol play into that kind of an ethos? Anybody? Jump in.
I figured Travis would be right on this.
Oh, well, I noticed myself kind of going first every time. I was like, I'll mix it up a little bit.
we got in a groove.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, alcohol is a great equalizer. We can all weep our eyes out or scream or yell or do whatever, and the next morning say it was the booze. Right? Like we don't have to own it. It's kind of a scapegoat. It's our buddy that's our scapegoat. Like, it was Jack, the whiskey, not the new god. And yeah, I think it does give hunters who don't know how to access emotion, because where would they have learned that, the ability to, you sink into your alcohol, emotion naturally comes up, and then you can either pretend you didn't say it, you don't remember, or like, oh, I was just drunk. You can play it off. You don't have to you don't have to mean it, right?
I mean, I think that's one of the things that's really powerful about the show is that it certainly starts out with that, neither of the Winchesters and most of the people around them, especially the ones who are hunters, are not good at talking about feelings. It's certainly not how they were socialized at all. John Winchester didn't socialize his boys to talk about their feelings. He didn't talk about his. Sounds like he often, just delved into a bottle himself. But over time, they get pretty good at talking about their feelings, even when alcohol isn't involved. So, while we're talking about how there is so much alcohol on this show and there is so many themes of addiction, and of course they're dealing with all this trauma, but I do kind of love that even though they don't ever get any therapy because there are no therapists who can work with them, they kind of work through their own stuff over the course of 15 years. And by the time that, the show ended, they're pretty good at getting in touch with themselves and communicating with each other. And, Sam going on, and you don't get the feeling that Sam lived a life that he, was in a bottle all the time. He raised a son and he seemed to do it in a healthy way. And so I like the progress that they made, even though we don't really see explicitly how they made that progress. We can track it over time with becoming more comfortable with who they are, being able to say, I'm good with who I am, I'm good with who you are. We do kind of have a journey of sort of recovery too, even though it's maybe more subtle than the journeys of addiction that we see on the show.
I think somebody had asked Jensen in one of his meet and greets after the finale, what would have happened in his mind if Sam had been the one to die in the barn? And his comment was that he thought Dean would have wasted away in the back of a pool hall. So Sam had the internal resources to move forward in a pretty healthy way, where I think he was very clear Dean would have just relapsed.
Well, we see Dean when he feels like he's going to move on and not be a hunter anymore. Like he's ultra paranoid, right? Constantly looking and being on guard and seeing more of his PTSD symptoms come up, because while he's drinking, while he's with her and the kid, it's not to the level he was before, right? But you see him on guard, and then you see Sam without Dean, and he's adjusts fairly well. Even if he's still hunting, he has a nice organized trunk with molded stuff for each weapon. Sam has those capabilities. Well,
after a while,
a little carried away in his organization there, I think.
Maybe a little bit.
Now, the first time Dean died, though, he didn't. We have that scene where Ruby finds him, and he's just plowing through bottles because he's going to go join Dean. So he got better at that with subsequent deaths.
How often
not
can
dead
you
yet.
say that?
Only on this show.
Only on this show. I think
before we move on to demon blood and the mark of Cain and other addicting substances, I wanted to talk about where the enabling and the compensating comes in with this, because Travis, you mentioned the road sodas and how often one of them brings the other an alcoholic beverage or pours something for them or pours them another one. And you've got, so there's a bunch of stuff going on there beyond the individual. So from a enabling and compensating side of things, any thoughts or insights?
Well, this is a culture. I mean, hunters are a culture. And, we go all the way back to hanging out at the hunter spots. Like this is just what they do, how they live. And so it's in our industry we'd call it normative, which is just like this is normal. This is what you do. A hunter comes back from a hunt, you give them alcohol, and so I don't know that I don't know that I would label it as enabling exactly. It's just, this is the culture that they're in. And there really isn't anybody from outside that culture that has a say. Cass comes in and he picks up on this culture, right? He finds a liquor store and he drinks it. He learned that from watching his new family. And that's what social constructionism does. The system wants to bring you in and have you be a part of it. So I see it as more of a, here's our little culture, and our culture is steeped in booze.
Yeah, it's because you, like with Cass, right? While you were talking,
Mm-hmm.
it came to me like he learns these maladaptive behaviors, and they're normalized. But you also see him be like, Sam and Dean, you constantly surprise me. I can never understand like what you're gonna do, like when they're willing to give themselves up for Michael and Lucifer, right? Like you consistently surprise me. Like when I think I know you, you show me more. And whether that's alcohol, the type of people they are, or whatever, while alcohol is part of their culture, it doesn't define who they are. Right? Where a lot of my veterans and in the Marine Corps, especially, we were born in a bar. 1775, they came and said, "Here, sign up." They were drinking and they signed up. That's how they got the first 2 battalions in Ton Tavern. Like so Marines are like, we're born in a bar, I'm gonna die in a bar. And that's kind of how they look at it. And then you see the hunters, just like Justine was saying, when do you see other hunters? Either at a kill site or at a bar. They're always running to each other at those 2 places. Because it is normal.
Or at a wake where it is also socially acceptable to overdrink.
Absolutely.
In a way, there's a lot of enabling too around the more behavioral things. I mean, certainly Sam and Dean enable each other's hunting. If one of them kind of pulls away for some reason or questions it or talks about maybe we'll retire someday, the other has a tendency to pull them in. Whenever one of them is moving out, the other one will kind of pull them back. So it's not the kind of classic enabling that we think of around alcohol, but it is a dynamic that exists for the entire run of the show. And I think between other hunters as well.
And yet certainly, and these are the moments that we don't get to see on camera. I think that there have to be some degree of that more classic enabling just for them to function, unless they're both always drunk at the same time. Someone's got to get food for the person who passed out. Someone's got to move them forward, and maybe they take turns. But if that doesn't happen, then they're both passed out on the hotel room floor and they get eaten by demons. So you that's sort of a headcanon thing, that this is probably happening in those things we didn't get to see on camera.
We've seen a little of that, like, one of them find the other one passed out, help them up, not real nicely, but, drag them up and be like, come on, shake it off, we got to go. But that's a form of enabling. They do come after each other, give the other one a horrible hangover treatment or something,
Just greasy bacon sandwich.
Yeah. Right.
Because you can find those at any bar almost.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So Dean's diet is spot on for where he is, his environment.
What about, we mentioned that they've learned this from the people they've been around, that this was John's coping mechanism with a reality. We don't know whether he would have been a heavy drinker coming home from Korea without losing Mary, but he certainly didn't bounce back from her death. Not only having him as a role model, but are we seeing any adult children of alcoholics behavior here with Sam and Dean over the course of the show? Does that come into this at all?
Oh, I'm hesitating because I feel like some of the classic stuff, I haven't seen as much, but maybe parts of me were tuning it out. So I'd be curious to hear if Lynn and Travis noticed anything.
I mean, Dean is certainly a caretaker. Dean was the one in the family who was the parentified child, stepped into almost the mother role, taking care of Sam, and his identity certainly is. I mean, that is why Sam could keep going, because Dean did a pretty good job of helping him feel okay in himself, and Dean didn't really get that. And Dean's identity still, even at the end of the show, very much revolves around Sam, which is why I think Jensen was right that Dean wouldn't have fared so well. So I think he does show some of that, it wasn't the classic alcoholic family that we think of because there's no mom in there, and but Dean definitely filled some of those roles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think that Lynn's spot on with that. Because he does do a really good job until a certain age when then he gets to go hunt, right? Where the other part of who he is comes to life. He's a caretaker for Sam and he's a hunter. And those are like the two things that he is defined himself as.
So when we move into some of the more arcane substances like demon blood and the mark of Cain, which is kind of a drug in its own way, we find both brothers are still very subject to addiction, only this time it seems to be more about compensating in power. Or do you read it differently, or what do you think when we talk about Sam's addiction to demon blood and Dean's resonance with the mark of Cain?
This felt so much more like drugs to me. That that he's hooked on that demon blood. He likes the way he feels when he's got that demon blood. And that, I mean, for lots of folks who are addicted to, stuff like meth or heroin, some of your like really addictive chemicals, like they crave it. They're chasing that dragon, right? And that's definitely the vibe I got from Sammy, was he was just chasing the dragon.
Yeah, less an escape and a numbing and more this is really reinforcing. I mean, there are opioids. There's a reason there's such a problem with them. These things are reinforcing. They feel good. Everyone wants to feel good. So I thought it was the demon blood and the mark of Cain. There were nice parallels in there in that it wasn't a case of either of them being like, hey, I think I'd like to do this because I'm such a hedonist. In each case, they were trying to do something that was unselfish and to benefit others. And as a side effect of trying to do that, they became hooked on something. So I had a great deal of empathy for them. But it can happen that way. Addiction can happen in all kinds of different ways. And once that reinforcement happens, it's very hard to walk away. Power is certainly addicting in the real world. It doesn't have to look like the mark of Cain on your arm. We see it all the time. People addicted to power or fame or celebrity or all these esoteric things that people don't want to give up once they have them. They really are addictive.
I was thinking about the mark of Cain over the weekend, actually, and how it relates to power. And then I thought about Metatron and the power that he kind of does too, and going from where he was to wanting to be the new god. And it was just weird because I never really looked at it that way until I started looking at power as an addiction.
Yeah.
So, and even
what you said just made me think. I mean, same with Castiel when he like swallowed all the souls and he trying to do something good, right? I want to be the new god. I'm going to correct all these wrongs that are out there, but became addicted, went totally south, lost the ability to make good decisions. Or even Chuck wanted like absolute power and he wanted adoration, and he ended up sacrificing his own sister, his own family, and being all alone at the end.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things, back to your point, Lynn, about trying to do the right thing, in that case where alcohol was something of an escape, both the mark of Cain and the demon blood was a way that they told themselves this made them better, stronger, faster, a better hunter, a better protector, better able to get vengeance or do the job. And yet it was giving them that, but it was also pulling them under at the same time.
Oh, I love the way you just said that, Gail, because it made me think of like times when ordinary folks do this, right? You do some kind of stimulant to stay awake because you're in a helping profession and you're a nurse or a doctor and you have to stay awake to save lives. And my understanding is that happens in the military too. We got to keep these folks on stimulants so they can keep working. And it made me think of like, you know, not to get cross fandom, but you know, super soldier serum, right? It's meant to do good, but it can really mess you up. Yeah, we see that in our everyday life too. That's a great parallel. Oh, this
Yeah.
show.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think about, because with stimulants, you know, whether even caffeine, you know, you always see them bringing, just chugging them all the time. Like you can find water and rip it energy drinks everywhere in Iraq if there's a marine or a military base. Like those are just the things you can always find. But also like oxy for like physical pain and numbing it out, because you're like, I can't feel pain now, I have to push on. Right, just like with Sam and his demon blood, I have to push on. So I'm gonna drink 3 gallons of this stuff so Lucifer's cronies can't hurt me. Right, and you just push through the power and wanting to put yourself and willing to sacrifice yourself for the greater good, which is such a theme in this show.
A lot of rationalization involved too. I mean, even, you know, going back to sort of acid, LSD, like it expands my mind. I can think better. I can be more creative. You hear a lot of these kind of rationalizations for a lot of different substances. That was really a lot of what Sam was doing. He was rationalizing.
Well, we also saw a lot of stolen prescription medicines on the show, because again, you've got people who aren't getting real health care. They aren't getting physical therapy. How many times has Dean dislocated that shoulder? I mean, there's a whole swath of fan fiction about them stopping hunting because Dean's knee finally just won't come back again. And so you've got people whose bodies are broken at a young age, relatively speaking, and there's pain to be dealt with. And I think that's another link probably back to the military, of people who come back with injuries that never go away.
Yeah, a lot of people I've worked with get hooked on random substances, whether it be from combat trauma or sexual trauma, to kind of numb out and hide, and then they end up getting kicked out. I actually work with a program with Veterans Treatment Court that is for this reason. If a veteran has a mental illness because their duty-related illness, and say alcohol, anger, substance, drugs is a cause, or like the maladaptive adjustment, right? They use it as alcohol, for instance, and they get felony DUI. They can go through this program, work on their recovery, work and see me and mentor, and they have a huge team behind them, and expunge their record. So that way they didn't ruin their lives because of something that happened in the military. So there are benefits out there to it because it is so common for us.
Lynn, anything to add on that?
I was just thinking though that you make such a good point, Gail, and it's it's interesting because it's one of the many times when fan fiction sort of gets it more right than the show. Because I mean, when you think every episode, these guys are getting just horrific injuries, the kind of horrible injuries that most of us don't get in our entire lives. And the show doesn't really, other than seeing them drink a lot, and you know, when someone, you know, they pull out their little prescription bag of stolen prescriptions, but it doesn't really address the kind of chronic issues that they would probably have. But fan fiction so often addresses those kind of chronic physical ailments, and I think a lot of times realistically addresses the addictions that might come with them. We don't necessarily see it on the show, but we do see it a lot in fan fiction. You're right.
Not to mention Sam's concussions.
Yeah, constant.
Megan always gets hit in the head.
Always. And always when my husband walks through the room and goes, again, they have to pick up across the room again, because he's Sam's size. So it's like, really?
Yeah, I was gonna say, because it's lucky that they have their angel on tap for all their, you know, duty-related illnesses.
Sure, and we find out later, you know, they've been God's chosen the whole time, right? If they hadn't been, what would their joints look like?
Well, they would have probably checked out a lot sooner,
right,
if they weren't amusing Chuck.
Mm-hmm.
As we're coming down to the end here, I just got to say, what about Cass with the stoner orgies? I mean, there you're hitting It's stoner and sex addiction with the angel. Where does that come in? With, I mean, I get it. If you were living in, Camp Chautauqua, I think you'd probably chew on anything you could find that would take you out of the everyday life. But how does that play in here?
End verse Cass is my favorite.
He's so mellow.
Well, and it goes back to chronic pain, right? He's like, I lost my wings. I'm not an angel anymore. I can't remember what exactly his physical complaints were, but he's like, the knee doesn't work the way that it used to, and why shouldn't I engage in these earthly delights? Like, he's got the efforts.
Mm-hmm.
I think it says something interesting about vulnerability. We see Castiel as an angel, and he's got this sort of superhuman fortitude, so he doesn't succumb to these same kind of things. But as soon as those things are taken away, as soon as he's vulnerable, as soon as he's human, he's trying to save himself from pain the same way other humans are. So I never thought about it this way before. Honestly, I just enjoyed that episode and that version of Cass. But now that I'm thinking about it, it says something interesting about, something very unshaming about how so much of addiction is about our context and things that make us vulnerable to addiction. I think we can have a lot of empathy for that. Even someone like Castiel, who was so fortified, when those things fall away and you're in a vulnerable position, anybody can be vulnerable to these kind of things.
Yeah, that's, as you were saying that too, I thought about a lot of my guys that they have to hit rock bottom for change to happen, whatever their rock bottom is. And for Cass, it could have been like, I'm a human now. Might as well just enjoy it, because I can't be what I want to be, so I'm gonna be who I'm supposed to be. Type of thing.
Well, and I would think that this has parallels to real life as well, in that when they're hunting, they're badasses. But what do you do when your badass isn't enough for what's actually going on around you? If you can be badass in one situation, but then have no coping skills for something else and not know how to deal with that. And that seems to happen a lot with the folks in the show. And I would think that would also happen, especially to people who are used to having that kind of badassery, who are trained warriors.
Yeah, there's a thing and a saying with a lot of Marines. I might be terrible in garrison, which is stateside, Kona side, but I am a great combat Marine. I excel in the field. And I've seen the other option, like great here in the rear with the gear, terrible deployed, terrible in theater or country. They just don't have that inner drive in them. And it really says who you are internally based on the circumstances you're in, where you're able to excel or kind of slack off.
How many people can move easily back and forth between the two?
I've met some, absolutely. They're good, both sides, but it's very uncommon. And it's hard because when somebody goes deployed and they're in theater and they're doing really well, then they come back here and then they're bored. And a lot of them end up going back to substances, drinking more and getting in trouble and getting kicked out, or being labeled as like a shitbird in the Marine Corps. Like, hey, you're just a crappy Marine, but I was really good in country. Kicking in doors at 19, I was the best. But here, hanging out and going to the chow hall, who cares how I'm shaved today? Life doesn't matter. We don't have that much of an important change in the community directly around us.
Wow. And I think that we see elements of that throughout the show when the boys try real life as opposed to the adrenaline high. They're great hunters, maybe not so great husband and boyfriend material.
It's so common for folks with trauma, right? You get so used to that feeling, and as humans, we tend towards that which feels familiar, even when that doesn't serve us and even when it harms us. And they just keep gravitating towards the stuff that feels familiar, which is demon hunting.
The evil I know, right?
Yeah, the evil I know.
This is the evil I know. I don't know who I'll be if I change. So watch.
Well, I want to end us on a positive note here in terms of coming back from or dealing with or bouncing back before we do our wrap up. Anybody have some positive insights on the Winchesters or on the subject? Because you're right, really, Lynn, Sam came back pretty well.
And I think Dean did also. I think I agree with what Jensen said, but I really like the 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, however long the montages were that we got in the bunker. You know, they didn't give up hunting, but they were able to integrate hunting, which is a big part of their identity. And, you know, they're motivated to help people, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but they were clearly able to integrate that with kind of an ordinary life, which was very satisfying to them. They had happiness, they had contentment, they had companionship, they had a dog, they had a routine. I mean, for the Winchesters, having that was a really big, important, positive outcome for them. That was living with some joy in life. Mm-hmm. I wish they had stretched it out a little more and emphasized it a little more in that last episode, because I think that was a really important part of the story and a positive part of the story.
Well, maybe we'll get it. Maybe
we'll get more.
They'll come back to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Lynn. I mean, this makes me think of in the drug and alcohol counseling biz, we call it harm reduction, as opposed to being sober, right? We're not expecting the boys to never drink again and never hunt again. That's an unrealistic expectation. But they can reduce their harm by having other stuff in their life so that this isn't the only thing they're doing. It's not the only way they're coping. And it harms them less. And I think we did get to a place of harm reduction with them where, you know, they're still using and they're finding some meaning in their life. Both things are true.
Travis?
I mean, both of them said it so well. It's hard to say something along those lines, but it makes you think about, like, from fanfic on, almost like the shift in how they do start reducing alcohol use. You know, when they get to see themselves outside of themselves by watching the end of that play, and like, oh, you know what? That means more to me than anything else. My brother's love means more to me than anything else. So
awesome. Well, thank you very, very much for being here. Let's go around, please, and tell everybody where they can find you online. Travis, start us off, please.
Yeah, thank you again for letting me come. You find me on Twitter at @themarine_peer, PEER, and I write for the supernatural psychology and other psychology books for like geeks like us with Dr. Travis Langley.
Lynn?
You can find me online on all social media at FangasmSPN. I also have a blog, fangasmthebook.com, and you can find my newest book, Family Don't End with Blood. It's so pretty. I have to show it to you. And there'll be Peace When You Are Done at peacewhenyouaredone.com.
And Justine?
You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Mind Body Fandom, because I take a holistic approach to healing, mind, body, and fandom. You can also find me at my website, blueboxcounseling.com, and starshiptherapies.com. That's therapies with an S, just like the Enterprise, and pick up this beautiful book.
Very nice. And you can find me at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com, but most of the time you can find me here on ConTinual. So thank you all very, very much for being with us today. And thank all of you for watching and listening. We'll have more Supernatural coming your way. So we'll see you online.